Hello and welcome, I'm Kira Scrivener, and welcome back to a casual Friday Reads. It has been a few weeks since I've updated after only doing it for a few weeks, but we're back on track. This is gonna work. I know for myself, at least in the Western Hemisphere in Canada, it is a little rough on the mental health to literally always have darkness. It is dark all of the time, and it is gloomy and snowing, but not quite snowing, so it's not quite pretty, and it's like crunch time with school and all of that, so please, if it is you or anyone in your life, remind self-care is really important. Taking time to just be like, okay, I'm going to take a bath or I'm going to do whatever it needs to feel yourself again is a really good time. I have had a rough few weeks of just feeling overstressed and lack of energy. Part of that is chronic pain, part of that is mental health, and part of that is November. So this week concluded mostly of more lighthearted slash easy to read, but not necessarily lighthearted books, and some favorites, and getting a little bit back into fantasy again, and I am so excited. The first book that I read this week was Sea Prayer by Claude Hussein. Claude Hussein wrote my favorite book, maybe of all time. It competes with Anne of Green Gables, but it is The Kite Runner, and this is his graphic novel children's book that I have been putting off for 4 years. I've been all his books off for like 7 years just because it's so hard to know if your favorite author is going to continue be a favorite author, and I've just been putting him off. But this one definitely rewarded me and told me that yes, he is amazing and that I will love his books no matter what. Like, this artwork is amazing. Like, look at that. I just realized you can see that my Christmas tree is missing half its lights. I don't know what happened there. You know, we're just going with it. One of the lines that reminds me that he can write both simply and also poignantly says, "But that life, that time, seems like a dream now, even to me, like some long-dissolved rumor." And it is so beautiful, and it is in dedication of a Syrian boy who drowned in the Mediterranean, and is talking about refugees and immigrants that have to flee their own countries because of violence, and how it's very hard for a father to know that his son might not survive, or that we don't really know what this journey happens. And I think that this is so important for children to know. It's so important to have more books that talk about this experience, because if you live in Canada or the United States or a lot of countries, it's very, you know, you get hit a lot with the like, why can't they stay over there and all of that other crap. And I think that having stories that are not, you know, central on white people having slightly less resources is kind of the best way to do it. And I think this is a beautiful book that highlights history and poignancy and can be really read by anyone of any age. The next book that I finished was Our Violent Ends by Chloe Gahn. I was so excited. I got this from the library and I read it all in one night, and I love it so much. This is the sequel to These Violent Delights, and it's a duology, so it's now complete. It's dealing with Romeo and Juliet set in Shanghai in the 1920s, and it is glorious. The atmosphere is amazing. The characters are amazing. I really love the way that she takes a lot of the Romeo and Juliet mythos, but she also adds a lot and she changes it, and it's so brilliant. The only thing that I thought was a little bit lacking was the character development a little bit. Like, the character development was so good in the first one, and we really got to see a lot of characters like Kathleen that I absolutely loved. But this one had a slightly less of that and a little bit more plot and a little bit more Roma and Juliet centered, which is fine because I love them. But I would have loved to see more Kathleen and some of the other supporting characters a little bit more like I did last time, but I still thought it was a fantastic book, and I really loved it, and I cannot wait to read all of hers. She's only 22, and I'm like, not jealous, but like just so much in awe. Like, I'm like, you are living the dream of all of us that have been writing since we were teenagers, and she just writes so well, and so, like, I don't know the word, like, it's just, it feels effortlessly, like, it's beautifully gorgeous, and there isn't any, like, it doesn't feel, like, stiff, it doesn't feel like trying to be created. She has some Taylor Swift references, which makes me so happy, and it's just such a beautiful series. And she has books that are continuing. Our Lady Fowl, I believe, is the book that is going to be kind of adjacent, following a character that she hasn't revealed to the world. It's kind of obvious when you finish the one who is the character that is a side character that will have a different story in Shanghai in the 1930s. And then she also has Our Eternal Yearnings coming up, which is an Anthony and Cleopatra remake, and I'm just so excited for all of this. And yeah, I really love her as an author so far, and I cannot wait to read all of her work. After reading Our Violent Ends, I was in such a fantasy mood, and I decided to pick up one of the recommendations my friend Kara from the Wild Book Garden gave me. I've been struggling with fantasy ever since COVID hit, so I was like, I really want to get back into fantasy, specifically YA fantasy, so she gave me a recommendation, hopefully going through all of the 6 that she gave me, so very lovingly, and like explained why, and it was like a specific thing. So I just want to love fantasy again, and this one was definitely the right air for me, and this one was light on the fantasy. I didn't actually characterize it as fantasy because it only has kind of the tradition in men or women that are magical like sword users, but like are just like supernaturally gifted, and I just didn't think that I would characterize it as fantasy, so I characterized it as historical fiction, but it was still really, really lovely and really rich in history. Jerry Thomas is the author, and the story is The Magnolia Sword. It is a reimagining of Mulan, and it is so well done. It's a little bit stilted and slow to begin with, and I was a little bit turned off at the beginning, but once I got into the characters, once I got into the writing style that is quite sparse but quite beautiful as well, the world building and the atmosphere is so evident. And in the end, she has an author note where she explains like she like knew nothing about this, so this is kind of like a work for hire, not completely, but like her editor slash agency kind of approached her and was like, hey, do you want to write a retelling? And she had written a lot of historical fiction. She grew up in China, so they were like, this is a perfect fit. And she was like, I know nothing of like the 6th century and all of this. So she did a lot of research, and she like found out a lot of things about her own history and her own time and stuff like that, and things that she just didn't know or had taken as truth that actually weren't, especially about the like the diversity of Chinese heritage and culture. And it really confronted a lot of her own biases and made her really find this one of the most rewarding experiences of her career, she says in it. And I thought that that knit itself into the story really well, because a lot of the story Mulan is kind of re-looking at how she looks at other people, because she has all of these people that are from different parts of China that are part of different nomadic nations, and they're coming together, and she's fighting, and she has traveled around a lot. I found it very interesting that she parallels her own experiences of being more educated about Chinese history with Mulan being more educated about the history of China during that period. We talk about literacy and how, you know, stories are not told, or how they can be told through people who have the power, and specifically a character who his language is only spoken and he has never learned to read, and how he feels kind of very inept in that way. And I like Mulan's response in that we are all born illiterate, and like that does not disqualify you from learning or being valued or things like that. And she herself has to learn languages. I really liked the fact that Mulan was raised as a boy from the time that she was a child. Her twin brother died when they were like a young children, and her father just disguised her as a son and said that his daughter died. So she is very used to acting like a boy. It's also not her choice in the same way. So she has to kind of grapple with these things. I thought it was just a really, really well done story. It's very slow paced, but I thought that like it was very interesting in character development. It also discusses fear and anxiety quite well, and how that doesn't really go away, and that that's a part of humanity. And the 4th and last book that I finished this week was Amazon's Abolutionists and Activists. And this is a graphic novel history by Mikki Kendall, and she is the author of Hood Feminism, a book that I really, really loved and read in January, I think. And it's talking about like how white women kind of ignore intersexuality, specifically of race, but also disability and queer identity and things like that. This one, I believe, was published first and looks at it from a kind of youth look, like it could really be accessible to anyone, but it has this setting of these characters who are women from different backgrounds, kind of debating about what it means to be a woman and what rights have been accomplished and stuff, and she takes them through by the use of like a kind of AI who is going through the history from the Sumer Empire and like how kind of patriarchy was formed and where early women's rights were, all the way to the AIDS crisis in the 90s. And then she has like a little bit of a panel on like the 21st century and how activism works in the 21st century. But I thought it was really interesting. We look at a lot of women whose lives were not highlighted, especially in my curriculum. Like, you know, we hear about good old Queen Liz and like all of those people. We don't necessarily hear about a lot of other women. Especially in the beginning, it reminded me a lot of Vashti Harrison, who I love, who does the Exceptional Women in Black History series and stuff like that, where she illustrates books specifically geared toward children, but I have loved all of them. And this one had this because we look at different empires, we look at different people and how they stood out, and how using that as kind of a grasp of a society and how their role plays. And I really, really enjoyed that. However, when we went into the 18th and 19th and 20th century, we focused very, very strongly on America. And that was really a downer to me. Like, I know Mikki Kendall is American. I really just would have loved to see conversations more on like decolonization and like women's rights in Asia and Africa and South America, because it was really like, here's America, and like here is the journey specifically around Black civil rights and how that impacted other things, which I know is like such an important story, but a story that is global things. I would have loved to see rights that were, and how women's rights and, you know, race rights and stuff like that happened throughout the world and not just in America, because it was very, very zoomed in on the suffrage movement in the US, which like looks different. Like, I know the suffrage movement from Canada and it like looks entirely different than the suffrage movement from America, but like that wasn't really touched on. It wasn't touched on the Nordic countries or Australia, which received the votes for women like about 2 decades earlier than the US. And I just thought, like, for a book that did so well in the global scale, I thought that it like really missed the ball when it came to discussing women's rights in the 20th century specifically. I don't want to come off harsh on this book because I really, really enjoyed it and I really, really recommend it. I just also thought like it really missed the conversation about women's rights and advocacy in like Asia, and how like especially in the 21st century Islamophobia is a huge thing. Like, that was not touched on really at all. One of the characters is a woman who wears a hijab, and she makes a comment at one point that a hijab is a choice, but other than that, like, the discrimination and conversations around anti-Islam and stuff like that is not really discussed at all. And also, like, mental health isn't discussed, and disability is only given about a panel or two, and queer history is given very, very little, and mental health is given nothing. I did read a few reviews where it said that it was too packed full, so I can understand why she would have withdrawn in some areas and not one. I just wish that it had been utilized more across the globe and across other areas of intersexuality. I of course never want to say that you shouldn't spend so much on one time, because like I think that especially Black civil rights are in the central of a lot of American issues, and the intersexualities across boards and how other movements got their start were often through Black civil rights and, you know, supported under that. So I understand why that was such a huge central thing and should be essential. I just almost wish it had been longer so that we could have had as much as we did about civil rights in the US, and also had a more encompassing view on the rest of the world and how, you know, that was inspired by anti-apartheid or like things like that that were happening in other areas other than America, because it is advertised as a global women rights movement. But then once America becomes a country, it's like, but also in the US. I would say even in that, Indigenous people often got kind of cut to the side, where like we really didn't look at them a lot. Like every like 20 to 30 panels, we'd be like, oh, what's happening over here? But like there was no discussion about like residential schools or the 60s scoop, or like a lot of the advocacy that is like, you know, one of the major advocacies, I guess, in Canada is a conversation around Indigenous rights and reconciliation and reparations for Indigenous heritage. And I thought that that, especially while focusing on North America, was not as much of a conversation as I would have loved. All of this to say, I can understand why she could not have focused on everything. It is such a large, encompassing view. When she was writing Hood Feminism, maybe because it was specifically on America, I think that she did a much better job of being intersectionality throughout all kinds of diversity and intersexuality. But I still loved it. And then to quickly finish, I will talk about the 4 books that I'm currently reading actively. There's way too many that I'm not actively reading. And the first one is Hawkeye. I finished this last night. I started the new series and I absolutely love it. I have had a few duds with Disney Plus, but this is really, really good so far. So I'm hoping. I really, really like Haley Steinfeld. I've always had a kind of a bit of a crush on Clint in the MCU. I know that a lot of people are just like, he's doing whatever, but like, have you seen the way that he uses arrows in Thor? Thor is one of my favorite MCU movies, and you know, both of them, people I absolutely love. So I was really excited for him to have it, and I really love the exploration of his family and of the dynamics of that, and I'm really enjoying the 2012 series so far. I'm 6 or 7 issues in so far, and there is some like humor that is definitely like 2012 edge humor, but there was this moment in like the 4th issue, I think, where rather than using derogatory terms for language, it was just in brackets like, you ginger patriarchal epithet. And I was like, oh, that's interesting, because like this felt very kind of manny man. I don't know how to explain that, but it felt very much in that like kind of edgy kind of stuff. So I was very interested when that happened, and they're like, oh, you didn't use that. Okay, cool. And I really, really enjoy the dynamic of Kate and Clint in here as well. I think that it's very well done, and if the show shows this and Kate falls into the character that she is in the comics, I'm really looking forward to that as well. And after I finished Magnolia Sword, I went and started Jasmine Throne. I am not a huge amount into it. I am already enjoying it, though. The audiobook is really good. It is really long, so hopefully I will be able to finish it before I have to return it. but I am liking it so far. I'm liking the world building and all of that. And then on Tuesday, I was having a day. It was a rough day, and I was like, you know what? I just need to go to a bookstore. So after I just kind of like drove to a bookstore, and I actually have a like very short vlog because I was like trying to keep up with videos and stuff like that, and I was like, hey, I will just throw together a little short video of me here. And I picked up this book because I was having a day, and then I picked this up and read it, and it already kind of helped me from the first page. And it's called Submerge, and I really liked the artwork on it, even though it's very light, so I wish it was a little bit easier to see. Look at this artwork right inside it. It's so gorgeous, and it's called Immerse. And the first poem says, "Bondage and jubilee, hymns and broken hallelujahs, created the sea in me." It's very simple, but also really beautiful. It has some longer poems, but I won't read them. "I tried to lay down my burdens, but they clung to my sinful skin." And when you're having like a really hard day sometimes, it's just wonderful to read these poems that are talking about both heartbreak and hope in them. The duality of water. A life-giving force can become a life-taker with each swallowing wave. This is the duality of water. And I think that sometimes I feel caught between the things that give me life and the things that also tear me down. So I think this book really spoke to me right away, and I'm really excited to read it. And I researched K.Y. Robinson a little bit after, and she is a poet. And then way back in the very beginning, maybe Saturday night, I think I read Some of Next Year for Sure by Zoe Lee Peterson. She is a Canadian author, and this is a story of a couple in Vancouver that are kind of stumble into a polyamorous situation where like they've always kind of discussed their crushes and stuff like that, and now the wife suggests that the husband should go on a date because he has a crush on this girl, and then she goes on the date with them. And I really love these dynamics. I don't know, I mean, like with like Luster and with a lot of other books, I just really love explorations of people who are in kind of that triangle relationship and what that says about society and what that says about ourselves. And I believe the main character is Chris, and I think that he is very asexual. I didn't want to have sex with her. I wanted everything that came after her. I wanted the cuddling and the complacency and the love that happens after generations. And that is a quote that someone who is sexual can say, but I think that it also comes into that, like that longing for companionship, that longing for romantic love, but not necessarily sexual love. And I find that very interesting, and I really enjoy it. And then my last book that I am slowly working through is Ariel by Sylvia Plath. I am very disappointed because I love Sylvia Plath so far. I have read Mary Ventura and I have read The Bell Jar, and two of them are absolute favorites. So this one being let down, I'm not liking her poetry. I'm just not getting into it. It feels quite, not stilted, but it just doesn't do anything for me emotionally. So I think about a quarter through, and I will hopefully finish soon, but I am not particularly enjoying. So let me know what you have been reading this week, what you have been enjoying. Please give me any recs that you would have, and let me know if you've read any of these books. None of these are particularly like super famous things, so I wouldn't be surprised, but let me know if you're interested in any of them. What have you been reading, and what have you been watching? And I think in the US it's Thanksgiving, so I will say happy Thanksgiving 6 weeks ago, because that is when the proper Thanksgiving is.